Hi, class. So today and this week, we're going to talk about issue framing. We're moving right along the policy cycle now. So remember, the first step was agenda setting. Once you've identified your policy, you need to get it on the agenda. You need to make people think about it. You need to make it forefront of their minds. You need to make them accept it, or at least enough of the population to accept it, that you have a fighting chance to create policy change. The next thing we have to do is frame our issue. Um, and this is really, really, really important because almost every time you want to create policy change, you're going to have an opponent, right? It is very unlikely that you want to create some sort of a change from the status quo that, even if it benefits the vast majority of people, doesn't not doesn't create sort of a negative impact on someone, or doesn't rub somebody the wrong way. So almost always when you're in the arena of public policy change, somebody is going to not want the change that you want. Um, and they are going to try to frame your issue in a negative manner. Now, what I'm not talking about here, what I want to be clear about what issue framing really is I'm not necessarily talking about lying, right? I'm not talking about just taking an issue and just smearing it and saying it's all kinds of things it's not. Um, for instance, you might remember Sarah Palin talking about Obamacare and death panels, right? Well, were there any death panels? No. Are there any death panels? No. Why would you create a death panel? A little bit weird. Maybe you can look to some of the euthanasia policy more recently in Canada and say, aha, maybe that's what they had in mind, but it was never anywhere in the bill. It was just something they kind of made up. I'm not necessarily talking about that. What I'm talking about framing is the way you can take an idea and be truthful, but spin it this way or that, right? You frame it as good or bad. You frame it in relation to a good thing or a bad thing. So let's continue with the healthcare analogy. I think it's sort of useful, and maybe this will help. If you remember back to the 2020 Democratic primary, there was a significant argument amongst the various candidates as to whether it would be useful to move the United States towards a system called Medicare for all, or whether that would be either hopeless or terrible idea. Um, and the Democrats could not agree on it, right? The people on stage couldn't agree on it. Now, when someone who was an advocate of Medicare for all, like Senator Sanders, came out and said, hey, what I want is Medicare for all. I want to give you all a new benefit. I want every American to be guaranteed to have a baseline of health insurance, um, regardless of their employment status or regardless of anything else. Just for being a citizen, you should have health care as occurs in some other developed nations. And they wanted to pay for that with a payroll tax, right? Basically, like Social Security takes 6.2% out of every one of your checks and gets matched by your employer. And like Medicare now, it takes 1.45% out of every one of your checks and gets matched by your employer. This would have taken another nominal amount. I don't remember the exact number. Let's say it's 12% or something like that out of your check. But then you would no longer have to pay your health insurance premiums, which can be substantial. I know mine are a few $100s every 2 weeks. So, how would it work out? I suspect for lower income people, it would be a big net benefit, and the higher income goes, probably the the more net loss you would have on that sort of program. Um, but here's the thing. Right now, about 180 million Americans are insured under private health insurance, right? Most Americans get that through their employer. And so as they're getting their insurance through their employer, um, you know, that's the system they know. It's the system they're used to. They're used to that money coming out of their check on the health insurance pre-tax line. Um, and so, as other people who didn't like the idea of Medicare for all took over, they came up with ideas like Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, who at the time I believe was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, um, came up with something called Medicare for all who want it, which would have been a buy-in program where if you had enough money and you weren't 65 yet, you could use that money to buy into Medicare eventually. But what he said, it would not rip away health care from 100 million, 80 million Americans who like the health care they have now. Now, there's a little bit of a... Watch the framing here, right? First of all, he says 180 million Americans who like the health care they have now. I'm sure some percentage of Americans with private health insurance like their private health insurance. I personally have not had the greatest experience dealing with Blue Cross and paying bills. I don't know about y'all. But I can't say I'm in love with the insurance company, right? Like, that said, okay, you know, I do have a pretty good plan, and yeah, I'd have to see a lot more details to know if I'd be better off under, Medicare for All plan or the plan I currently have. I'm lucky. I'm a professor at a state university, so, my health insurance is pretty good. My family is on mine, so, maybe I wouldn't be one of the people who net benefited. Maybe some of y'all would benefit greatly, though, right? So maybe some of you have terrible, terrible plans. They're out there. My wife's company has a much, much less generous plan with a much, much higher deductible that covers a lot fewer things, which is why, she's on mine. Some companies are more generous than others, and that's just how that goes. All that said, you see what they've done, though. They've taken the same idea of Medicare for All, which is like, all right, let's scrap this private insurance system and replace it with a universal government insurance system. And one is spinning it as something you're getting, right? You're getting this new benefit, this guaranteed Medicare, no matter what age you are, no matter your employment status, just for being a citizen, you're covered. You don't have to worry anymore. The other one spinning the way is you're getting something ripped away from you, right? You're getting forced into this thing. Now, in a way, both are true. That's the damnedest thing about issue framing. There's not really a lie in there. Closest thing to a lie was 180 million people who like it. You should have said, the majority of whom like it or some number like it. But, I'm not going to be pedantic about it. Generally, it's true on both sides. And then the problem is it's one of those things, I think the fundamental question people always ask is like, do you view the glass as half empty or half full? It's the same damn glass, right? The glass it's half a cup of water in a glass. Or let's say it's a pint glass. It's 1 cup of water in a 2-cup pint glass, right? So it's the same exact amount of water. You could describe it fine. But if you want to go and you want to convince people that the world is terrible and you want to be Eeyore and mopey, you can say it's half empty. And if you want to convince people that the world's great, you can be Piglet, maybe a little bit happier, you tell it, the glass is half full. Really half empty, half full, who cares? It's 8 ounces. Right? That's framing. That's the core of what framing's about. The battle of the frame stuff is really, really important because once you lose it, you've let your opponent define the issue, and oh boy, can public opinion swing depending on a frame. We talked about Obamacare. I'm going to get off the healthcare topic for next week, but I'm just going to use it for these 2 weeks. We talked about Obamacare, and one of the great successes that Republicans had with Obamacare was naming it Obamacare. The actual bill, Democrats named something terrible like the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2009. Just rolls right off the tongue, right? The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2009. For short, they called that the ACA for Affordable Care. They got rid of the PP. But you would find that when you polled Americans and you said, do you like the Affordable Care Act? About 10 or 15% more would say yes than if you said, do you like Obamacare? So what was happening there? A good chunk of probably mostly Republicans, but some independents and maybe some nominal number of really confused Democrats, decided that they like the Affordable Care Act, but when they heard Obama's name, they just said no because they just don't like Obama. And what they're doing is, by framing it as Obamacare, they're sort of associating it with a figure that's less popular than the bill itself, at least among certain constituencies. And that's the trick, right? So making sure you have a good frame for your issue is important. Now, this is kind of a marketing game, right? This is a political communications game, too. It's wordsmithing. It's sales. It's How do you make something appealing? And so this crosses fields too. It's another psychological game. A lot of political psychologists care a lot about this. And how do you do it? Sometimes you can do it through a method called priming. This is the last thing I'll say, and then we'll close this up. I know we've gone a little over 10. But priming is when you associate an issue with something that's positive or negative. Obamacare was kind of a great way to do it, right? But you can do it even without changing the name of something. Watch, like, Fox News next time, or watch even one of the YouTube videos. A lot of times what they'll do is there'll be graphics of, like, American flags waving in the background, or eagles, or, like, all these really, like, American symbols, right? And what that's meant to do is make you trust the information more. There's no need to have a waving American flag graphic behind everyone's head. But they do it, because they prime you to trust things more when you see certain symbols. And we can do this experiment with people on just surveys, right? If you have a little flag symbol next to a policy question, you can get a few percentage more people saying they like that policy than if they don't. Doesn't matter if the policy is raising minimum wage or, creating a pathway to citizenship. Just by surrounding the policy with positive or negative symbols, you can move some percentage of the population. So be careful being primed, too. They can definitely prime you to be in a bad mood or a good mood about something, and they can do it without even saying a word. They can do it just with symbology. So that said, take a look at the stuff this week. Think about how you would frame your issue for your paper, and spend some honest time on it. Because if you get the framing wrong, you might not even ever get this thing passed or off the ground. I will see you next week.